which select board members are still missing. I see Vince. I
Here.
see Pat, I think you're on. Pat Murray. He is logged in but not responding. So until I get at least an acknowledgement from Patrick, we will not be starting because we will not have a quorum. I don't see Dawn. I don't see Andy. Text. Oh, I see it. Okay, Pat is here. His mic is giving him an issue. So we can go ahead and begin. And as soon, oh, I think I see Andy.
Yep, had some internet trouble. I'm in.
And Andy's in. Okay, and so far we're just waiting for Dawn. So we're going to begin because we have quorum, and I'm sure Dawn will join us as soon as she's able. So welcome to the Monday, July 6th, 2020 Select Board meeting. I will call the meeting to order. Are there any agenda additions or changes?
Staff does not have anything.
Nope.
Okay. Do
I
any
think we have
board
the wrong agenda is up.
Oh, yeah, that's the joint agenda.
Thanks,
Thanks. Vince.
So we had talked about the
Vince, you're muted.
how about now?
Good.
Great.
Sorry, Skype's been kind of freezing up on me. So I know we had talked about the revised language on the mask or resolution that we had talked about. I was wondering if we could just pull that out of the consent agenda and make it 5C so that we can have the public comment on that and then do our thing.
Moving 6A to 5C. Is that what you're asking?
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. That is something we can do. Are there any other changes the agenda board members would like to make?
Nope.
Testing my microphone. Can people hear
We
me now?
can hear you, Pat. Yeah.
You're all
Awesome.
good.
Excellent. Okay, so we will need a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Vince,
I move that we approve the agenda as amended.
is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Andy. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay. Opposed? Okay. And it does look like Dawn has joined the meeting, which is awesome. Full complement today.
Just curious, did Dawn vote on the agenda?
I did not hear her or see her vote, but we can ask her. Dawn, are you connected?
Okay. I'm going to say that the agenda passed 4-0. Thank
I
you.
think that's accurate, Kathy. Thanks for checking. Okay, the next item on the agenda is public to be heard. This is for people who wish to talk to the board about items that are not on the agenda. So if you have something you'd like to talk to the board about, you can either raise your hand using the hand icon on your menu bar, or you can put a comment in the chat saying that you'd like to speak. And we will leave it open for 30 seconds to see if anybody wishes to make themselves known. Okay, I see Ken Signorello wishes to speak. Go ahead, Ken.
Testing, testing.
We can hear you.
Thank you for recognizing me. I appreciate it. I wanted to talk a little bit about something I heard at the last joint meeting. It was something that was mentioned about number of unanimous votes. I think it was in context of talking to the attorney about how we typically have unanimity some 95% of the time. And so what I wanted to do was take a quick look at that. You might remember that that was something that was mentioned at a previous select board meeting back on February 18th. It was mentioned that there were 882 votes over the course of 5 years, 837 unanimous, and 45 not unanimous. And that got me thinking a bit. First thing I did is take a look and see how many meetings there were per each of those years. And you can see that 2015, 2016, so on, that adds up to 167 meetings. I also took a look at 2020. So far, there's 29 meetings. You're tracking 58 meetings for the year 2020 at this point. So that got me thinking a little bit. So if I took those 882 vote totals, divided by the 167, 5.3 average votes per meeting, that does make sense. I've been to enough meetings now for over the course of a year that added up to me. But it got me thinking that of those 837 unanimous votes, how many of them were for things like accepting the agenda, accepting the minutes, entering executive session, exiting executive session, accepting the consent agenda, and then adjourning. And of course, who doesn't vote for adjourning, especially when it's 11 o'clock, nearly 11 o'clock. So what I just got to thinking was that it's important to remember that precision is not everything. Accuracy is also important. And to say that 95% of the time there's unanimity, technically that's true. From a precision point of view, that's true. But really, you need to take a look at, say that there's 4 per meeting, which would fall into one of those, it's going to be unanimous under any circumstance. Removing those, you need to look at what's left, which are those votes which there's some discretion involved. And I think it would be more accurate to say that there's unanimity approximately 80% of the time, 79 to be exact, and 21% where there's not unanimity. So it's just a point of accuracy versus precision, really. And I really think that it's important, especially when the discussion is going towards influencing a vote, which it was back in February. It was going towards influencing the vote where the select board took the position to not support 3+3. And this was one of the points made in favor of that. And I think it's just important. It's still obviously a fairly high majority that's unanimity, but it's not 95%, I think, to be accurate. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Although it has been quite some time since I've looked at the data behind those figures, I can tell you that adjournments were not counted because those were not considered important votes. So that's not part of that data set, but I cannot recall off the top of my head all the other ones, although I know consents were included because there were occasions when people did not approve the consent agenda. Okay, Ken, if you could mark your hand down, please.
I am doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to speak to the board on items that are not on the agenda? Okay. Then we will move on to business item 5A. And I just want to make a quick reminder to the boards that we have a joint meeting starting at 7:15. So I'm hopeful that we can keep to schedule as much as possible so that we're not keeping the public or the trustees waiting unduly. So business item 5A, approved revised clerk's office hours prior to August and November elections. And I believe I saw Susan McNamara-Hill's name in the list of attendees, but I'm not sure which staff member wishes to present.
I could certainly. Susan, you there?
I am here, yes.
Great.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
I could start off. Susan and I talked about the upcoming elections. As you all know, we are expecting large turnouts. She brought the idea to me. I'm in favor of the idea. I just want to make sure that we have it well publicized and that we are being as customer friendly as we can. And if you have any questions, you're certainly welcome to ask Susan as to how this will all work.
I believe both Andy and myself had a comment on this item in the packet that I think this is at the discretion of the clerk, but that we both were concerned that as long as everybody knows about it, that'd be fine with all of us.
Yeah, this will be included in the warning that will get posted for the meeting, for the election, the clerk's office hours, and the fact that there won't be hours that day will be included. As far as same day voter registration, there's still a polling place. Same day voter registration can happen on the day of voting at the polling place. So it shouldn't affect anybody's ability to vote. They can also still register online. I don't know, does anybody have any other questions?
Board members? None? Okay. Even though the board packet said that it was looking for approval, I don't know that we need to vote on this because it is the discretion of the clerk. Would you agree, board?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So Susan, thank you. And let us know in advance if there, well, I'm sure you already have, what we can do to help you. The workload is going to be enormous. And so I'm sure many of us would be more than happy to take some time and volunteer to help.
Okay, that sounds great. I will let you guys know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Okay. Item 5B, discussion and possible action on FY21 property tax due dates, interest and penalty. Sarah Macy, take it away.
Thanks, Elaine. Hey, everybody.
Hi.
Hi. So this is a topic that we talked about briefly a month or so ago as sort of just an informational piece. And we are now at the point where a decision needs to be made if we are going to make a decision to change any of these three items for the upcoming fiscal year. So tonight we're talking about due dates, the interest rate, and the penalty rate. These are items that we need to know about so that we can start preparing to print and mail tax bills. So the printer will begin to work on the template so that when we're ready to print them, they're ready to go and they can just get into the mail. So that's why this is coming to you in advance of setting the tax rate. Elaine and everybody, if you're okay with this, I think that the easiest way or the best way for us to approach this is to talk about each of these three pieces separately. And I think we could just tick off what I think is the most straightforward one, which is due dates. And the state has said that they intend to have the education taxes due education tax rates out to us on or around July 1st. Haven't seen them quite yet, but it is on or around July 1st now. And so I feel like we're in a good position to keep the due dates the same at September 15th and March 15th, which I think helps to reduce any confusion about switching things up. It also helps maintain our cash flow through the year, and it also will help the school maintain their cash flow. That being said, my team is ready to run with whatever the decision is, but we would ask that if we do make any changes to this piece that we stay within a couple weeks for those cash flow reasons. I think if you guys have any questions about this piece, I would take them now and then we can move on to the other pieces.
Okay. Board members, any questions for Sarah about the dates? I can't see your faces right now, so.
No, none here.
Okay. Sarah, can you just remind us, the school district is expecting their payment a certain amount of time after March 15th and September 15th, correct?
That's correct. So we transmit the dollars due to the school within 20 days of the due date. So if we did change our due date, it's my understanding, and I have been wrong before today, but it is my understanding that that would shift as well, but it is still 20 days after that date.
And is the cash flow for the school district such that if we delayed our payment, by any time it would be a problem for them?
I've not spoken directly with them, but given that we do transmit 18 to 19 million dollars for each of these payments, I think that they are likely waiting for that. I do believe that they do a temporary tax anticipation note borrowing to cover some of their early cash flow. And so, Evan has his hand up. I think he's had a conversation with them about this.
Evan, please go ahead.
The answer is it depends. If it's going to be a week, probably they will be a little sticky. If it's more than a week, yes, they will have issues. They would have to do call on probably their letter of credit. That's why when we looked at this, it's not just us making a decision for us. It's us who have the money for the school district and the village of Essex Junction.
Hmm. And Sarah, can you remind me what the average home annual tax bill is? Ballpark.
I can pull stuff up. I mean, I don't have that at my fingertips.
Okay, I wonder if I have the annual report. The reason I'm asking that is because I'm wondering, you know, I think it's not so much the timing of the bill, but the dollar amount of the bill. That might be a problem for folks when we get to September and we are looking at potential impacts from the economic fallout of COVID-19. So I'm wondering if, oh, I can't find it either because it's focusing. So I'm wondering if the dates, I think it would be best if we left the dates the same and talked instead about interest and penalties.
That's my feeling as well.
Yeah, because like waiting a week is not going to make that money come faster for people.
Right.
Board members, any other thoughts or questions on the, Andy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, got my hand up. Yeah. Sarah, the taxes aren't due until the 15th of this month for folks, so they haven't necessarily filed their homestead. Is that for, if they're filing now, is that for next year's taxes or for the coming year? You know, which I've confused myself now. Do we know, or are we putting ourselves at risk of people having to or not get their tax prebate or whatever it's called now in time for the September 15?
There is a risk of that. The state in their district transmittal newsletter, where they said they are going to have education rates at the beginning of July, also said that they anticipate having the bulk of all of those homestead downloads at the beginning of August, which would still fit into our timeline. Okay. Is there a risk that that's going to get delayed? Yes. I think that there's a risk of that. What is the risk? I'm not sure. They've published that they expect that they plan on having that at the beginning of August, and so I'm relying on the data that they've published.
And you need this decision now so you can print the bills with the right dates on it.
That's correct.
Right. Okay.
Sarah, why don't we move on to the next consideration?
All right. So the next one up is interest. And so interest is charged on delinquent principal at a rate currently of 1% per month on the outstanding principal only. That is in our charter. And that's the way we have been doing. I've put in this memo for illustrative purposes the interest that was charged over the last 5 years for the full year at the current rate of 1% and then stepping it down by 0.25%, just so that we have something to inform the discussion. I try to, when I write these memos, make a recommendation and be clear about it, but I'm frankly at a loss here with COVID. This is just, unprecedented, which I know is kind of a overused buzzword right now, but it's definitely, unemployment Essex is still double digits for May. don't know what that's going to do in June, July, or how that's going to affect people for what the fallout is going to be. So I'm hoping that we can have a discussion and land on something that we all think is the right move.
Okay. Board members, what are your thoughts about interest?
I'm very interested in interest. But no, to be serious for a minute, I think maybe extending the delinquency deadline is better than adjusting the interest rate.
Okay.
What is everyone else's thoughts on that?
Well, I have a question about if we were to change the interest amount to say 0.5, and it would subsequently reduce the revenue for that. Evan, is that reduction and subsequent loss of revenue considered something reimbursable in terms of FEMA or any grants that are coming from the state for COVID expenses or foregone revenue?
I have not seen anything. This would definitely not be FEMA. They will only do expenses directly related to costs related to services. And Sarah's been working on that. I did not see anything in this realm. The second answer I'm sorry, I've lost.
Well, I was wondering if, so I know that the state is preparing a grant pool for municipalities. It's going to be administered by the Agency of Administration. And do we know whether if we have foregone revenue from penalty interest or interest revenue, can we get it back?
Yeah, I think the only thing that they have said is we could try to get a low interest loan or no interest loan to float this particular percentage. We don't need that at this time. If let's say the board chose to lower the interest payment down to 0.75, we would, and Sarah, I'm assuming that's $31,000 of lost revenue.
No, that's what we would have billed in interest in FY20 had it been at 0.75%, as opposed to the 42,000 that we billed.
Right. So basically, we would be down about $11,000. With that, my guess is by the end of the year, if all things were then equal, we would just probably have less of a surplus. But this is not a year I want to say all things being equal, because we're dealing with whether people pay their property tax at all during this period, and eventually we will get it, but there's a balance. So we have seen the unemployment numbers. We see that there is some correlation between unemployment and non-payment of property taxes. Is it a direct correlation? No, it's not. It's close, but it doesn't happen that often. You have to have some trigger, some event that's caught, so it's very hard to say. But if you want to know if we're going to get reimbursed for any of this money, the answer is no. Okay. Not likely.
I do know there's a grant coming, but I don't know what the requirements will be or the criteria. So we'll have to keep our eyes open for that.
If we were going to get money, it would be mainly for issues of overtime and other payouts due to COVID-related sickness or illness in police or fire.
Okay. Pat had his hand up, and then Dawn, I'd be curious to hear what your thoughts are.
I think Evan kind of hit on the head. What is my concern with us deciding interest here is that it's not so much about whether or not we think people are going to be late, but it's whether or not they're going to be able to make these payments at all. I mean, we may be in a situation where we may have so many people compared to usual with needing to take late payments and getting assessed these interests. For all we know, at least on the books, we may end up making more money. than we would typically expect to see, because we would have more people with late payments affected or impacted by the interest rates and the late fees. I guess where I'm struggling with this is that we literally have no data telling us where people are in regards to being able to pay their tax bill in September. I'm really struggling with how we could make any sort of changes to this with literally no information. I mean, we basically just be shooting from the hip, as far as I can tell. You know, I'm not sure if that means that, or rather, I'm not sure that that is enough for us to justify lowering the interest penalties and the rates now, because we just plain don't know.
Thank you, Pat. Dawn. You're muted,
Dawn?
Dawn.
You're still muted, Don.
Dawn, you're still muted. I'm sorry.
No.
No.
No, Don, I don't think it's
Now.
Teams. I think there's something with your microphone.
Try now, Dawn. No.
It's been a night for this, boy.
Yikes. Dawn, if
You can try calling in, or I can try calling you. If that, do you want me to call you? Nod your head if yes, or if you want to call in. Okay, give me a moment.
Yeah, Don, also if you could hit the like 3 dots on the control bar and then go to show device settings. And if you're there, can you nod? Okay.
well, let's continue the conversation, and Dawn will contribute as soon as she can. So Pat, you're saying we don't have enough information to make a decision on penalties yet.
Okay.
Oh, there's Dawn. Awesome. Go ahead.
No.
Nope.
Okay. Now I'm being.
Oh.
I'm getting some kind of weird message on my phone here.
Make sure your mic is off on your computer, and then you should be able to talk on your phone.
As far as I know, it says it's off, but
We can hear you now.
We can hear you.
is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with what Pat was saying. Without more information, it's hard to make this decision. I would go with whatever Sarah recommends, because Sarah has the most experience in this.
Got it. Okay.
That's very kind of you, John. I did not recommend anything though, because
Right.
I also agree with Pat in that we just don't know. And is that, you know, and is knowing better or worse for decision making?
Well, Sarah, my impression was that we needed to make decisions on this because it's time to print the bills.
That's
So-
correct. And the
so-
bills say what the interest and penalty and due dates are.
So if we don't make a decision this evening and the bills come out, and then we start hearing anecdotally that residents are really starting to feel the pinch and that we're expecting an increase in delinquencies, can we change the rate later?
I think that the legislation goes through the end of this calendar year that
Okay.
allows you to make these changes. I see some board members with thoughts
Yeah.
on that.
Andy and then Vince.
I have some concern with changing the terms later, because you then have people who have paid their bills on time
Right.
in order to avoid the penalty and the interest, and then they just can discover later that there's some forgiveness that they could have had but
Right.
didn't have the opportunity to exercise. So I'm, you know, it's you know, cutting it from 1% to 0.5% based on the data we have is, you know, $20,000. It's a tiny amount relative to our overall budget, and so I have no. I was going to recommend 3/4, but now I've convinced myself that going to 0.5% would be fine. And then if we find we have a problem, then we can adjust it. I think we should adjust. I think we should be proactive and say, hey, you know, if you have an issue, we've got your back now, rather than waiting.
Thanks, Andy. Vince.
So I know I'm going to be the lone voice here, but I still think we should extend the deadline, but in a different way. If your home assesses for over, like, let's say 20% the median home value of Essex, your property tax is due on the normal date. You're assessed at the normal 60 days for interest. If you're under that threshold, and I mean, I'm just spitballing, so if there's better thresholds to use, then you get like 120 days interest free. So that way people that earn lesser incomes or have less, I mean, I don't know, that's the only way I can think of doing it with property value, because we don't know everybody's like income for, it's not like we can say, well, if you make, you know, less than 50 grand, you know, you have 120 days. If you make, you know, over that, then you have 60. I don't know how to do that, like, because I don't know that we have all that information, and then tracking that down would be kind of difficult. But like my suggestion would be that if your home's under a certain value, you're given an extension, because your home value generally correlates with your socioeconomic status. So that's my opinion. I know it's not really based on anything or any data. It's just kind of what I think is right, you know, in my long career of shooting from the hip. So.
Okay, Vince, thank you. Andy, your hand is still up. Did you?
Yeah, it went back up.
Okay, please go ahead.
In response to some of the stuff Vince said, the property taxes are already income sensitive, at least the education taxes, right? Sarah, is it only the education taxes that are income sensitive? I'm pretty sure.
It's not. That payment gets divvied up between the education tax and the municipal tax.
So the municipal tax is also lowered by people's income level?
That's correct. I think they take the overall tax bill, but then when you in order they take the overall tax liability against your income to calculate the total state payment. But then you'll notice on this past year's tax bill, the form changed slightly, and it shows you which piece of that state payment was offsetting your education taxes and which piece was offsetting your municipal taxes.
Yeah. And so it's my understanding that so Vince, we do have that data, because that has to be used to figure the taxes. But I agree it would be a big workload.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Andy, to interrupt you, but we do not have that data. The state does.
Okay.
And that's protected information.
All right, that is, yeah, I was hoping that we don't get to see that. Yeah. Okay, good. But there's already an income sensitivity, so I would think it would be overcomplicating things and it'd be potentially inappropriate to assume that somebody's income is related to their home value.
Pat, is your hand up or is that left over?
It's up. I was wondering if, honestly, we should maybe be looking at combining, talking about B and C here. If we're concerned and worried about penalties and the ability of people to pay, I think that the penalty amount of the 8% immediately following the due date would be more impactful for us to adjust, instead of the 1% or what have you, after for each month that comes on. So I know that we haven't gotten there yet, but I think it might not be a bad idea for us to look at that now, because it might be better for us to make a decision based on what we think is going to impact people the most, rather than taking these as separate items.
I'm in favor of that. I think that's a good idea.
I agree. Thank you, Pat. That's a really good suggestion. And one of the things that we have a little bit, so interest is about how long it takes you to pay, right? It's not compounding interest. It's just how long between the due date and when are you able to pay. The penalty is a larger percentage. It's a one-time hit. And we actually can look at the data through the lens of different delinquency rates. So let's assume that property tax delinquencies follow the unemployment curve. And we know that in May, unemployment in Essex was just over 10%, I think, if my memory serves me correctly. I know back in the month before May, which was April, it was 13% and it dropped a little bit, but it's still double digits. So if we get our magic 8 balls out and we make some sort of assumption like, well, maybe it will just stay at 10%, then we can look at the impact of that tax delinquency level at different penalty rates. And I think that we can all agree that this is, and I agree with Kat, what I think he was getting at, this is a much heftier penalty, and this really cripples people more immediately than that interest charge. So whether we go with a combination of changing the two, or a combination of, I'm starting, as we're talking, which I really appreciate everybody's input in having this conversation, maybe, Vince is talking about what sounds like a bit of a grace period, as opposed to changing the due date, which I can get on board with. And then maybe doing something with this penalty rate, and that would be a good place to start. So open to questions and comments at this point.
Board members? Vince, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of that, like some sort of grace period. So I think if we don't adjust the interest, I would be definitely in favor of adjusting the grace period for the penalty that's assessed on people. I don't know, maybe we can put this point behind us and then go on to that. I don't know what everybody else's thoughts are.
Well, the 8% is a hefty one-time penalty that's the very next day. And in my short experience on the BCA, that's been something people complain about. Dawn, I think you can probably back that up way better than me. It's the penalty that gets people upset. Andy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I guess a clarifying question. Does the interest then also accrue on the penalty if they can't pay that immediately? Or is it only the...
It's only on the outstanding principal, but if you did have the principal and then you were charged the penalty and you came in and you did not pay that full amount, your payment is applied to the penalty first before the principal, so then you would have an outstanding principal amount. So, sorry, that's not a straight answer, but the interest is just on.
Okay.
Dawn, your hand is up?
Okay, I'm going to try this. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would agree with leaving the interest alone, extending the grace period, and lowering the interest. Because you're right, it is that 8% fee that everyone comes in to ask waived before the Board of Civil Authority. So
You're saying extend the grace period and lower the penalty, or lower the interest?
No, lower the penalty.
Penalty, okay. Vince, is your hand back up or is that legacy? Oh, now Pat.
Nope, no, I'm out.
Okay, Pat?
I'm on board with the same. I think if we're going to make a change, which is, again, difficult without data, but if we are going to do it, we should do it here in the penalty section. Again, keeping in mind that even if we were to make no changes, which I don't think we should do, I think that since we're talking about it, lowering this penalty is probably the way to go. But the option still does remain for our taxpayers to go before the Board of Civil Authority to get this penalty waived. So it's not as if we're leaving them completely high and dry. It's an option that is still going to be available for people who are having difficulty making their tax payments on time.
Mhm.
I think having multiple avenues here, we provide what relief we can, but then knowing that it's, there's another mechanism is going to be important.
So if we were to reduce the penalty rate from 8% to 5%, we would be foregoing $143,000, Sarah? Is that accurate?
Which row are you looking at?
I'm looking at the row that starts with 8%. And
So-
I'm subtracting the 5% figure from the 8% figure.
Okay, so the if currently our delinquency percentage is 2.5%. So that very top row.
Oh, okay.
So in the current year, we would have foregone $45,000.
Okay.
I think that we should not assume that in September our delinquency rate will still be at 2.5%. So as we go down the rows, those are higher and higher delinquency rates. Just for conversation point, the budget does include $90,000 for penalty. If everyone paid their taxes in any given year, we wouldn't get that. So it's not about making sure we raise that money. It's just a piece of information for discussion. I would throw out there, maybe we start discussing slashing the penalty to 3%, implementing a grace period. I want to be clear, we have no grace period right now, so this would be a new thing of maybe a week, and leaving interest as is, as a point for us to start honing in on a decision. Thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Seems,
So.
Yeah. Go ahead, Andy.
Oh, sorry. This is Vince.
Oh.
Yeah. So that was going to be my comment next. Was that my mind is kind of shifted to keeping the 1% interest on the monies that are not recovered, and then we kind of go forward with, like, I don't know. My personal thought is 120-day grace period, and then go into 3% on the penalty. But that's my opinion. I don't know. What do you all think?
I would not be inclined to increase the penalty grace period beyond a month. I feel like 120 days is a little bit like a loan. And the 8% is, the 8% is, if I'm correct, is passed on from, like, if Essex is late paying its taxes to the state imposes 8%. So when a resident is late paying, we impose the 8% on them. And so if a lot of people waited for 3 months to pay their penalty, then we would have to front that to the state for 3 months. So I'm thinking a week or less, excuse me, a month or less.
Okay. Evan, do we know if any of those are getting waived?
You mean other towns doing this?
No. Are the penalties getting waived by the state? So, like.
Oh, no, they're not.
No, they're not.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
They've instituted a loan program, so municipalities can borrow money to cover the taxes that they're short with no interest. So the towns will still have to pay it, but they wouldn't have to pay the loan with interest. Andy.
So I'm confused by the grace period discussion. Are we talking about changing the due date for taxes, or
No.
the due date for the penalty?
Penalty.
So is there a due date for the penalty?
It's
Today?
the next day. Like it's imposed the day after the due date.
But so I'm still confused as to how this works. So if we're going to keep the due date for taxes on the 15th, but move the penalty date, the 15th of September, we move the penalty date to the 15th of October, what's the incentive for me to pay on time?
You'd still be charged interest on your outstanding balance.
So
Is
if
that
I
correct, Sarah?
so if I can pay the full bill before October 15th, I have no penalty. So I've taken out a 1% loan for a month.
That would be accurate, Sarah. Is that correct?
That's correct. So currently, we don't start charging the interest because the penalty hits the day after the due date. The first interest hits 30 days thereafter. So
Okay.
I think that we should consider pulling that first interest back. Well, actually, no, because we're talking about a 30-day. Okay, sorry, I'm getting confused too. Consider pulling that interest back, and then 1 month later, the penalty would hit if you still haven't paid everything.
So you have to move the penalty out by a month and the interest in by a month in order to have happen what I think has been proposed.
I think so as well, because Andy, one of my concerns, just from just like in my office with my spreadsheets hat on, is the interest and penalty are an incentive to pay on time. And then if we don't move the due date, but we start a grace period, we still have to pay the school within 20 days of that due date. We remove the incentive to pay on time, so we put ourselves in probably the worst possible cash flow position for making that payment. If we move the due date out, then that 20 days to pay the school moves out a little bit as well. So I do think it's important to have something as an incentive to pay on the stated due date.
But if I have a credit card that has an interest rate of 18% that I haven't paid off, I could pay that instead of paying my school taxes and come out ahead. Right?
Yes, you could.
So we're giving people a loan that way. Do we want to be doing that?
So Sarah, this is why you started with the recommendation of 1 week.
Right. And
That's correct, yeah.
I'm sorry, Evan, go ahead.
I'm gonna go with this keep it simple rule, please. It is gonna be hard enough with people paying, knowing the due dates, and doing some type of rubric. Please keep it simple. Either, keep the due dates, give them a short period if they're late. If they're not able to pay you within 7 or 15 days, they're not going to be able to pay you in full on the 16th day. There's probably something a little more structural to their not being able to pay. Plus, a vast majority of people escrow their taxes in their mortgage. So someone is probably going to make a payment of whatever they could. So I would suggest keep it simple. Maybe create a 2-week grace period, leave everything else the same.
So that brings us back to the initial suggestion when we started the conversation: penalty reduced to 3%, a grace period, a new grace period introduced for 1 week, and leaving interest at 1%.
Is that a motion?
I'm asking if the board's comfortable with that.
I'd like to go with Evan's recommendation of 2 weeks, but that's just me.
2 weeks from Vince. I see some heavy thinking going on amongst the other board members.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I think it's a hard decision without literally any numerical guidance as far as whether or not we think people are going to pay or not. But I think that this is a way for us to be as generous as possible with what we think people are coming to us with in difficult times, difficult situations. And by lowering the penalty rate, if there are more than usual delinquent taxes, then we will see, a way to close that gap in our budget, just naturally.
Dawn, your hand is up.
I'm going with the 2-week grace period, and I'm okay with the rest.
2 week. Andy, what do you think?
Just a question. We're talking about both September and March, correct?
Sarah?
That is correct. My recommendation here would be that we put this in place for the full tax year.
So it'd
Okay.
be for both due dates, regardless of what's happening next year. Are we going to have the forgiveness for the school taxes in March?
What do you mean forgiveness?
Well, isn't there an opportunity to borrow money if we don't have it in March? I mean, what are the due dates for the school taxes, right? You said it was 20 days after we collect. Was it still 20 days after we collect in March also?
That's correct. Yeah. And if we had 4 coupons, it would be 20 days after each of those. So that's
Okay, and so we have 6 days to turn that around if we have a 14-day grace period, right?
That's correct. We have the cash position is currently strong. We have good open relationship. We have excellent customer service at our banks. I'm confident that if we got to that point and we needed to move on a tax anticipation note in order to cover that shortfall, that we could do so in a timely fashion. I'm also open to just having this for the calendar year. I mean, in my brain, I think in fiscal year chunks. So.
Yeah, I'm struggling with making the decision for next March as well. Yeah, so.
Well, I think we just don't have a crystal ball for that, Andy.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, because the economic impact of what's going on, I think is going to be felt for longer rather than less time. I feel okay going out to March, but not beyond that. If board members don't have any other comments on this or questions, I think we've settled on something to vote on. A reduced penalty to 3%, a new grace period of 2 weeks, and the interest amount remaining at 1%. If you're ready, we can do well, before we do a motion, we generally open things up to the public. So let's do a quick 30-second window for the public to see if they're interested in speaking. I see Ken is interested, and go ahead, Ken. After Ken, Andy is after Ken.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, Andy should go first.
Well, Andy, was that leftover? That was leftover, Ken. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. What is the name of the group or the committee that hears abatement requests? Board of Civil Authority, is that right?
That's correct.
So I was just thinking that all these changes are going to be very confusing, and folks that can easily pay will take advantage of any opportunity given them, I think. So might I be so bold as to suggest that you just keep everything as it normally would be and include a note in the tax bill to say if you're experiencing hardships, how to apply for an abatement to the Board of Civil Authority, and give guidelines to the board so that they could be a little more flexible than they normally would be. So that way folks that can pay will pay. Oh, Dawn says no, not a good idea, Dawn. I take it back. Oh, no, I don't take it back. I'm done.
Go ahead, Dawn.
We have to follow the guidelines that the state give us. There's 8 to 10 different criteria before we can abate anything. And what you're asking is not one of the criteria.
Financial hardship, I believe, was one of them.
But then they have to prove it.
Yeah, granted.
And that takes a very long time to prove.
I see. So it's not practical, you're saying?
No.
It was a thought.
That was a good one.
So any other comments from the public?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes. Who is speaking, please?
Hi.
Your name?
My name is Sonia Boyan Clark, and I live in Essex Center. And I'm calling to ask that the the select board creates more opportunities for public input around the police oversight board, and that you work with the police department to create an oversight board composed of Essex residents in order to monitor.
Sonia, thank you. We're talking about property taxes right now, and we'll be talking about the police in the next meeting. Can I ask you to hold that thought for a few minutes?
Yep.
Thank
Is
you.
it next week?
No, it's tonight, but it's after this meeting. We're gonna stop and start.
Okay.
Thanks.
What time?
It was supposed to start at 7:15, so we're running a little behind. It'll be soon this evening.
Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Tracy Delphia, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I'll be very brief given the time. I just want folks to be careful and wary of connecting higher property tax values to not being affected by COVID and unemployment and loss of income. The two are definitely not related. So I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks very much. Ken, is your hand still up, or is that left over? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've had some public feedback on this business item. Can I receive a motion from a board member?
I move that the select board institute a 2-week grace period to leave the interest at 1% and to shift the tax penalty to 3% for the upcoming fiscal year.
For all of FY21?
Yes, all of FY21.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Vince. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Oh, wait, Andy Andy
sorry.
Oh, sorry, Andy.
No problem. I was just trying
to
push buttons quickly here.
Okay.
I just want to understand again the grace period. Is that only applies to the penalty, or does that apply to does that allow you to pay your taxes 2 weeks late with no interest? I just want to.
I think it allows you to pay your taxes 2 weeks late with no penalty.
That is how I believe it as well.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that the motion is clear to say that. Not sure it did.
Kathy, can you read back what you have?
He said that it would institute a 2-week grace period, and then he went on to describe the rest, but it didn't clarify for the penalty at that time. So the motion should include something that says 2-week grace period and then include for the penalty at that point.
Pat, are you in favor of that friendly amendment?
Yes, I will happily accept that friendly amendment if Vince is okay.
Yep, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Andy, thanks for clearing that up. Dawn, you're good with that? Okay, so let us take a vote then. We have a motion and a second on the table. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you all very much for a good conversation. And Sarah, thank you for preparing these materials for us. And I hope that, I really appreciate the thought that went into working things out so that our residents can get somewhat of a break should they need it at tax time.
Thank you all for your thoughts and your input as well.
Thanks. Okay, we amended our agenda to include a new business item 5C, the resolution encouraging the use of face coverings during COVID-19 state of emergency. So this was in our consent agenda as an approval item. So Greg, would you mind reminding us where we left off on that?
Sure. So this is the resolution encouraging the use of face masks during COVID-19 state of emergency. It was a discussion between the Select Board and Trustees last month. The Trustees have approved it. There were some language changes to the resolution, draft resolution made at the meeting. The Select Board at the time had a vote that stalled out 2-2 in terms of whether or not to approve it. And I believe the two that were voting against passage that night wanted to see the language come back before the Select Board before they took any action on it. So now that it's been updated, I wanted to bring it back to the Select Board for your review and consideration.
Thank you. So Vince, you were the board member who asked for it to come into the business items. So did you have something in particular you wanted to discuss?
No, I just wanted to make sure that the public had a chance to comment on the amended resolution.
Okay. And any other board members, did you have questions or comments about the resolution? Pat? You're muted.
Sorry, I'll keep it brief because I know we're going over, but I think that it's very important to note that the latest statistic shows that 49 states have seen either equal or increase in COVID infection rates, Vermont being the only one. From this week to last. So this is still very much an ongoing crisis. I think it's very important that we get that out there to make sure that Vermont continues to stay ahead of the curve as far as keeping COVID rates down.
Thanks, Pat. Did anyone else have any comments or questions? Okay, before we vote on this resolution, then let's take time for the public to weigh in. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to make a comment on this resolution regarding masks? I see Brad Kennison. Go ahead, Brad.
Yes, just a short comment. The latest statistics that I saw, it might have been late last week in Vermont, there's 2 people in the hospital. We've had 1,200 plus cases and 957 have recovered. So we're doing very well in Vermont. I think a resolution to encourage, but not to make it mandatory. I believe from just experience being out there, in the public, that most people are using common sense and wearing their masks. I see very few people not wearing masks in establishments. So a resolution to recommend, but not mandatory. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Irene.
Hi there. I don't know what draft you're working off because this line is not visible to me in the resolution that has been showing on the screen, but I noticed in the last whereas there should be an S at the end of the first line. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other members of the public wish to comment on the resolution? Okay. We will bring it back to the board. What is the board's pleasure?
I move that we approve this resolution.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Pat. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. And Vince, thanks for pulling that out of the consent agenda. The remaining items in the consent agenda are the minutes and the check warrants. Would anyone like to move to approve the consent agenda?
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second that. It's Andy.
Thank you, Andy. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. All that remains is the reading file and board comments. Do you have any comments to share or anything about the reading file? Andy.
Yeah, just that for the upcoming meeting schedule, we rearranged the schedule. So now we are meeting on July 20th and I'm out of town that day. I'm not sure if I'll be able to participate. I will try. I'll know more at some point, but as of today, I don't know that I'll be able to join.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate that. Anything else on the reading file? Okay, that concludes the business of the select board meeting. And now, not only 20 minutes late, we could be joined by our friends on the village trustees.
Hello, select board. Thank you.
Hi, guys.
So I see in the side that George is here, or that everybody might be here. I'm just going to go ahead and do a roll call to make sure. George, are you here?
Yes, I am.
I see you there. Raj, I see you there. Amber, I believe you're also here. Amber?
Yep, here.
Oh, great. Dan will not be joining us tonight. He is otherwise occupied. So it is just the four of us. So on that note, I would call the trustee meeting to order for July 6th.
All right, and the select board is already in session. I would like to ask if you have your microphone on to please mute your microphone unless you're speaking so that we avoid background noise. So Andrew, I don't remember who was doing the review of the charter last, but we have to remember to take turns on that. So think about what we were going to do there. Are there any agenda additions or changes to the joint meeting agenda?
I have one thing. It's some feedback from some staff members in terms of the Planning Commission, Development Review Board, Zoning Board discussion that can go with item 5B for discussion on the charter.
Thank you. Are those, did you email those to us recently?
I got them out where basically as the meeting was started, so I will share them with you now, and I can also pull them up when we get to that part of the discussion.
Right. Okay, it's just that none of us will have had a chance to read them at all, so, okay. Any other additions? Okay, I see that there's some folks asking to speak. If you could just wait a few more moments until we finish the agenda additions, then we'll switch to public to be heard. So select board, if there's no further additions to the agenda, can I get a motion to accept?
I move that we accept the agenda.
Thank you, Vince. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Scott. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's all yours.
Thank you, Elaine. Trustees, is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So move.
Thank you, George. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Amber. Any further discussion on that motion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is public to be heard. This is for items that are not on the agenda. And we have Annie Cooper showing her hand. Please go ahead, Annie.
Hi, thank you, Elaine. With great respect to the process, I missed the last set of meetings, but the meetings before that, it was asked about the time. And respectfully, I really believe that we could have started this meeting at 7:15, and I think that it's imperative that there's a true sense of time structure. Even though I appreciate the time given to the people that need to speak, I do think that there were ways during this meeting previous that could have been tightened so that this could have started at 7:15. I implore that is pushed a little bit harder. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Does anybody else wish to speak about items that are not on the agenda? Okay, hearing none, we're going to move on to item 5A, discuss next steps in community discussion about policing. And before we begin, I just want to say super quick that some of us have gotten emails from the public saying that they didn't have enough time to speak at the last meeting, and I acknowledge that, and I'm very sorry that our timing on that was not done in a way that was conducive to public input. Hopefully you will have all read the packet and the memo that Andrew Brown and I sent to the town manager to ask him to ask the CJC to convene a public conversation. We're trying to put the groundwork in place to create a very large community conversation. So I'm asking for patience and to bear with us while we get that started. And in the meantime, for this agenda item, this was intended to be an opportunity for the board members to talk about their impressions of our presentation from Essex Police last time we were together, and any questions, comments, and thoughts that they might have about that. So I'll throw it open to any select board members who wish to speak about the policing conversation. Dawn.
Well, I agree with the public that they were not allowed enough time to speak. I think that the initial police presentation was too long. And in regards to what you're proposing, I think the CJC has too much on their plate right now, and it should be a select board responsibility.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. Andy?
You just mentioned, you said you hoped that we all got an email from you and Andrew about the CJC. I thought you said that.
It's a memo in the packet for the joint meeting.
Oh, okay, sorry. I did get that then. I have a couple of concerns. One is how the decision was made to go in this direction. I would have thought it would have been a board discussion rather than, I don't know how this decision was made. Is it just me, or is there a lot of horses galloping in the background?
There's a lot of background noise. If folks could please turn off their microphones.
And I'm a little concerned that we're making plans before hearing from the public. I think we should. I think my opinion is the way to approach this is to have an open meeting with, as you said, Elaine, sitting in quietly and listening to what people have to say, and then plan after we hear what people's concerns are, rather than making a plan up front without hearing the input first.
Thanks, Andy. Pat or Vince? Go ahead, Pat.
I think Dawn said it about the public not having enough time to speak at our last meeting. I don't need to reiterate or go into that terribly much. In regards to this current meeting and the memo that was sent out, I wanted us to be clear, or at least rather I should say, my feelings on it, to be clear, is that I think that while the Community Justice Center does really great and amazing work, that as something that is, or excuse me, as an organization that is answerable to the police department, that they're not appropriate for being the sole facilitator. If they are brought in to assemble a group of stakeholders, then I'll be more confident about it, as long as they are able to do that and then let an independent body be able to move and make recommendations. I want to make sure and be very clear that in my opinion, it's very inappropriate for the CJC as a subset of the police department to be kind of leading this conversation, at least until we get to a point where they are able to bring in outside stakeholders, third parties that are not involved with the police department, and let the conversation grow from there. That's my main concern.
Thanks, Pat. Vince, do you have any thoughts?
I can't really speak to the public comments on the last section in the last meeting, because I don't think I was here for that was the 29th, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I was not here for that. But I do want to say that I echo the whole, we sit, we listen, and then we plan going forward. I do think that's the best way to do it.
Thanks. Before I hand it over to Andrew, because I'm sure that Andrew and the trustees have very specific thoughts on this. My thinking on this was that, first of all, the public definitely wants some action and conversation on this topic right now. And the select board is absolutely not in the position to pick up such a massive topic of such importance right now. And on the other hand, there is a town-based organization that, yes, while it is underneath the police department, their mission, one of their missions, is to facilitate community conversations about public safety. And so I think asking the CJC to assemble the people who want to have that conversation is a logical first step, but it would not be my expectation that the CJC would run the entire process. I would rather ask them to convene the appropriate stakeholders because they have the expertise in the subject matter, they know the community, and they understand the issues. And the select board does not have that expertise and does not have the time. And we need to do this topic justice. So I'm hoping that CJC can get the right people in the room, a very large group of people, and there was lots of suggestions in the memo of who some of them might be, and there's probably more that are left out. But that was my thinking when proposing that the CJC at least get the process started. Andrew?
Thank you. And I would just elaborate briefly before I turn it over to the rest of the trustees. One of the reasons that I would support the effort that's in the memo is also that one of the things that we have heard is that some of the people who may wish to speak may have an aversion to speaking directly to the police, may have an aversion or concern about speaking to any people who may be an authority figure, which I would say those of us on boards are. We have power that whether we realize or not, we do have, just given the fact of our positions that we are in to create ordinances that pertain to the rest of our community. And as such, taking us out of the first layer of the hearing process will help to open it up to people who may have that fear. And also it would help to take away, speaking for myself, any personal biases that I have in terms of setting up a structure that may hinder the ability for others to speak. And then the other thing that I would say is, I think this is one of those times where we really need to do something outside of the normal, and we shouldn't necessarily just expect for people to come to a meeting out of their normal day and tell us what they think and hear, and that we should be open to hearing feedback in other methods or through other methods. And so that's why I wanted to make sure to elaborate a little bit more. With that, I'll go over to the rest of the trustees. And Raj, I see your hands up.
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the thought and care given into finding a path forward that will provide the audience for the concerns everyone has going forward. I think, though, that, and I say this with good understanding of the workload the select board has, being a trustee, that in the initial phase, I think they need to find the time to, as the board that is sort of tasked with the police department. I think the public would want at least an initial opportunity to have them hear their comments. I don't have a particular concern about the CJC being independent. I think we just need to get going, and I think that process allows for that. So I appreciate the time that was put into the plan, and I think I look forward to the conversations that will result. So thanks for doing that. And the only addition I would have to that is to say that I think finding a couple hours to witness and hear what everyone has to say in conjunction with the CJC would kick it off the way people are.
Thank you, Raj. Amber, you have to go next.
Sure. I guess I don't have much to say except that I support the proposal. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Amber. George?
I think turning it over or having the CJC initiate the conversation is an excellent idea. I agree with your comments, Andrew, and Elaine, I agree with your logic for having them start the conversation. I think it's a good idea. I think it could come back to the select board and the trustees eventually, but I think that I'm very familiar with CJC's work, and I think they're very well suited to do this, so I think it's a good idea. And it's one other thing, I'm going to have to leave the meeting for about 10 minutes. Something kind of just came up, so I'll be right back. My apologies.
Thank you, George. And that's the trustees.
So I think I saw Jill Evans, who is the director of the CJC, join the meeting. And Evan, I'd like to ask you and Jill to just talk about your thoughts on this, and then I'd like to open it to the public.
Jill, you or me?
How about you first, Evan?
So, I think we, from a staff perspective, are in agreement that we would want people who know how to facilitate a public conversation of this gravity have the expertise to bring entities and people who can help facilitate that conversation together. Already, we've had some staff discussions. Jill, the chief, Greg Duggan, and Aaron McGuire from View with the school district about how to structure this and how to do a listening session and something of that nature. So I would look to the CJC to be more of the lead in putting together those groups and those people and the structure of the meeting versus what, and versus what their daily role may be and who they report to. Ultimately, everybody reports to me, and I report to the board, and the board reports to the people. So we are well aware of the gravity and the nature, but we want to do this right. And we have tried to use the last couple of weeks to get our hands around what something like this could look like and be like, and give people that space where they are comfortable telling us what they want to say. And so with that, I will turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Jill.
Thank you, Evan. This is Jill Evans, the director of the Community Justice Center. We actually, as Evan said, did have an internal conversation today during which I brought up the potential conflict of interest optics of having an entity that operates out of the police department to be part of, to be doing that on our own. And so my recommendation falls in line with what I've heard a bunch of people say, that what we are really good at doing is helping to convene and create containers for safe conversations, but we are by no means the expert in terms of the racial experience with policing and particularly in the Essex community. I also want to be, I may be making an assumption going out on a limb here, but I'm assuming that the majority of us are white privileged folks on this meeting. And I am a little hesitant to say what it is and how quickly it needs to happen for people to feel safe to tell their stories without checking in with people of the non-dominant culture. I think that the memo outlined a bunch of entities that exist. There are more out there. I think that it would make sense for maybe a public-private partnership where someone who did have the content, was an expert in the content, might be brought in to help the dialogue itself. And I think what we would like to do, if the board and Evan says that it makes sense, would be to convene a first meeting of as many folks as we can get together that represent the broader community, not just people who are white, and to get their feedback about what who's missing from the table and what we need to be considering, and to report back to the select board maybe with a little bit more of a vision that's informed by people other than us about what it needs to be. I definitely sense the feeling that people have that they want it to happen very quickly, and I don't know that will provide access for everyone, to just have it done really quickly.
Jill, I appreciate that distinction, because you're right. There is a sense of urgency about it, but we can't rush so much to the point that people are left out. So one of the many reasons why it's more appropriate for your organization to pick this up and start, in my opinion.
And I also imagine, just from previous racial justice work that I've been involved in, that
it might not be one huge community forum, but a number of different avenues through which people can share their voices. I imagine some people will want to be able to do that anonymously. Some people may not want to do it with, depending on what it happens, if it's in person or not. Like somebody said, with a lot of people with authority in the room, like I think we need to check out what is going to feel safe for people to come and share their stories.
Thank you. Andy, I think I see your hand.
Yeah, question I have is, are we going to limit the discussion to the police department, or is this the whole town in general? Because there are, you know, potentially other hidden biases that could or should be looked at.
I think the urgency of the moment requires us to explore the racial aspects of policing in Essex, but I do think that the conversation could evolve into other areas of implicit bias and ways that we can make everything more accessible in general. But I do think the focus initially should be on racial bias.
Racial bias in the police department?
I think it will be more racial bias as a topic in Essex with police and school, and because depending on the stakeholders who come to the table. But perhaps you could be a little bit more specific about what you have in mind.
Oh, this could get controversial very quickly. If you want to hear examples in open meeting, okay. Number of years ago, I was on the select board, and we were talking about prepping for town meeting, and at the bottom of our warning was a asterisk that said adequate accommodations will be appropriate accommodations will be provided upon request, or something like that. I asked about translation services, and the answer I got was that, you know, people want to live in America, they should learn English. Believe it or not, that's what was said in a select board meeting. So that's a, you know, that's a very blatant one that really should never have happened. Another one that is likely to be highly controversial, if you want me to say it here, as I read in 7 Days this weekend, the town of Townsend is concerned about that they have a Negro Brook running through their town, and they're discussing renaming it. Well, we have Indian Brook. How is that less offensive?
Understandable, Andy. There's a lot of examples.
So there's a big conversation that this really could spring into, and it really needs to, right? So,
right. And I think
that's why I'm asking whether it was limited to just the police, or whether we're going to go through a broader community discussion.
Well, I think what we're hoping for is for community members to share their experiences, and they're going to be wide and varied, and they're not going to be limited to the police. So I think we should be expecting to hear all sorts of things that we weren't expecting. And I do want to point out that board member comment you heard, that was a long time ago, I'm hoping.
And it wasn't a board member, it was a staff member.
Okay. Well, we'll hear a lot of stuff that makes us very uncomfortable in this conversation, and that is part of the reason we're having it.
Yep.
Thanks, Andy. Select Board, do you have any other comments or questions before we move on? Andrew, do you want to have a wrap up of trustee comments, and we'll open it to the public? Oh,
sorry, I did. Yeah. Jill, I was actually glad that you brought it up, and I wanted to stress it as well. A method or a mechanism for anonymous feedback, I think, is going to be critical. It's something that people have asked me about in the last few weeks. People do not feel comfortable talking to not just the police, but anyone who might be representing the police, including select board members. You know, so as we're going through this conversation, I want to make sure that we're not just obviously engaging those who are able to come to a meeting, but that this mechanism allows us to go to people who wouldn't normally be heard, and also get feedback from people who are not comfortable typically giving it. If we can assure that there's going to be some, some assurance of privacy in the stories that they tell, and if we have the ability to provide that, I think it's going to be critical that we do that. There was, the incidences of racism, continue to happen in Essex. I mean, literally, up to this day. I got permission from a friend of mine who was walking down the street just last week and passed a black man. And when she was walking with him, a car drove past and they screamed out the window, "All lives matter," at him before driving away. It's just small aggressions like that that take place every day here in Essex. And I think that it's, so important that we get on top of this as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Pat.
So in turning it over to the trustees, I just want to make sure to clarify my understanding is what we're talking about for next steps, and that is having the CJC work to create the process and help to convene multiple opportunities to receive this type of feedback that we're talking about, and to not just have a one and done, we heard feedback, we're done. Just want to make sure that my assumptions are correct there. Great.
I think you're right there, Andrew.
Thank you. So trustees, any other questions, comments, concerns?
No.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
None for me.
We're good.
Okay, so with apologies to the public for keeping them waiting yet again, is there anyone who would like to make comments on this business item before we move on? You can use your chat to indicate that you'd like to speak, or you can raise your hand on your menu bar. Annie Cooper.
Hi, thank you, Elaine. I'm so excited, Jill. Thank you so much. And I'm not sure how we got to. I missed a little bit of the last meeting, but I'm really excited and enthusiastic for the movement of this type of conversation out away from the setting, and it sounds like it's going to. I'm sorry. It sounds like it's going to involve more, and I'm excited by that. I'm sorry, my phone is being weird. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Lorraine Zaloom, and then Tanya Vyhovsky.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you, Elaine. A couple of questions. One, I'm curious as to why the village trustees are weighing in on this agenda item. I know it was mentioned before because there were ordinances involved, but given that the suggestion is that it's kicked down the road, the can is being kicked down the road, I don't know why they'd be weighing in. And two, an observation that it looks to me like it's fairly split, that people from the Junction are interested in pursuing the CJC facilitating something, as opposed to people who tend to live in the town who are looking for at least a select board comment period, which I don't see why we can't do both. And given that you seem to understand, or you've said that there is a clear impetus to act quickly, this is not exactly acting quickly. And since we were so upset last time, I'm just saddened that we aren't at least taking public comment by the select board on this, so that we can at least start and see, do we need to involve the CJC in the beginning, or is it something that we can handle? And also just curious why there's no time to do this, because it looks like it might be because it gets in the way of merger. So just a couple of observations from the outside looking in. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. Tanya Vyhovsky next, and then Tom Proctor.
Hi, thank you. I am absolutely in support of a robust public discussion, and I also think that there is some problematic stuff if we are asking a group that works for the police to lead that conversation. I have begged my husband to come and speak at these, and he is one of the people that doesn't feel comfortable as a person of color speaking to the police. And so I think we have to consider how we create space where everyone is truly comfortable. And I think we have to be having a conversation about creating a public safety system that includes all voices and has deep investments in community supports for prevention rather than reaction. And simultaneously, I would advocate for a citizen oversight committee that has the power to weigh in on who we are hiring and has the power to weigh in on disciplinary action when it comes to use of force. I think we really need to have a robust engagement with our community to build that kind of public safety system.
Thank you, Tanya. Tom Proctor, I believe you're on the phone.
Yeah, hello, thanks for calling on me. My name is Tom Proctor. I am the Chittenden County Organizer for Rights and Democracy. And I've been doing a lot of racial justice work in the past few weeks, and I'll be honest with you, I feel that the response by Essex has been woeful, which is really unfortunate because I know how great of a town it is, and feel that there is really there's a lot of energy there to actually start this conversation properly, as opposed to the way you seem to be going about it, which is using a lesser body that reports to the police that's merely advisory. I think it's been mentioned by a few people how problematic and what kind of conflicts of interest there are with that. I would also like to talk a little bit about how one of the board members said he would be uncomfortable listening to public comment on this because he feels that he would be biased. Now, I feel like you could pretty much apply that to the entire CJC board. So if he's feeling biased, imagine what they're going to feel. I would also say, as members of the select board, it is your responsibility to begin this conversation and to help the citizens of Essex hold the police to account and really start that process of reform. You've mentioned before that it's really important conversation right now. It's important we have this conversation. You even mentioned it's important we have this conversation with speed in order to be able to kind of work with the moment that we've got. It seems like you're saying one thing but doing the exact opposite and kicking the can down the road, throwing it to multiple different boards that will eventually advise, it will eventually filter through the police, it will eventually come to you several months down the line when you don't have to actually pay attention to this issue because it might not be in the public consciousness anymore. I feel that the process you're going on is insulting to the people of Essex, and I really would urge you to reconsider.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who would wish to speak on this topic?
This is Sonia again.
There's Sonia. Hi.
Hi. My name's Sonia. I live in Essex. I'm a white woman, and I would like to echo some of the calls for doing process of public comment. A lot more than you might realize. Creating a space where people are truly going to be comfortable and able to come out and share their experiences. It's going to require a lot of time and it's important to act quickly. Urgency is also a part of white supremacy culture, and I just want to offer one, I guess, anecdote of and how sometimes government, especially when it's run by predominantly white groups, which is pretty much the whole state government, can respond in ways that are really problematic and create further issues down the line in an effort to be expedient and to have things done quickly, and that is like how the Attorney General and some white legislators following the harassment and discrimination against Representative Kyle Morris, they decided to try to create this whole new category for for bias incidents because the discrimination she was experiencing didn't count as a hate. Very, the intention was for it to be helpful, and throughout that process, they didn't consult with any people of color leaders in Vermont, and the result is the process that they came up with was just further perpetuating racism because it diminishes the effect, the the gravity of racial bias from hate crime to bias incidents, and it wasn't an inclusive process. And so I just, as a select board, I to really consider carefully the way that you go about this process and ensure that you're doing it in a way like accessible to the public. It's using avenues that you might not there, not be people use. I think what Bill said.
I'm sorry, son, you're breaking up quite a bit.
Is that any better?
A little bit.
Hello?
Sonia, do you
Okay.
have your computer audio on as well? Can you stand away from that or maybe turn
No,
that down a
I
little
only
bit?
have it on my phone. I'm only on my phone.
Oh, okay.
I'm not on the computer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I would just say that, you know, this process really needs to be designed intentionally and thoughtfully, and it's not something that's going to change overnight. Racism has been built up for many, many, many generations, and to really create transformational change and not just changing things on the surface to make ourselves feel good, that requires really intentional engagement across difference. And all of the meetings that I've heard so far, I don't know for certain, but from what I could tell based on at least outward racial appearance, mostly is white people. And a conversation about white people talking about police brutality is really disingenuous to the whole system of policing in America. And so I think it's really critical that you work on this to create spaces where really all members of the public can be heard, and do it in a way that also allows for other aspects of race and racism in this town to come forward, like in the schools, and other aspects of our town and governance and housing. Policing, you know, is the conversation that's most prevalent right now, but that doesn't mean that there isn't racism in all other aspects of the way the town is ran. So I think this process, there's this, right, there's urgency, and then there's also the need to do it, to be methodical and truly inclusive in the way that you go about soliciting public input. And so my main message is just that it's really critical that at every step of this process, you're working very hard to ensure that many voices are heard, and particularly from people of color in Essex, and that you create mechanisms for anonymous input.
Sonia, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes? Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak? I see Kathy.
Hi, I just wanted to remind the public that any chat in the sidebar doesn't, I'm the recording secretary, it doesn't actually show up in my minutes. And I apologize for that, but it would be truly a challenge for me to be doing both things at the same time. So thank you for your understanding.
Thank you, Kathy. Ken Signorello and then Irene Renner.
Hi, very briefly. If my understanding is that the CJC gets involved with restorative justice, so it's sort of on the continuum of police interaction, it's kind of somewhere in the middle. I think a lot of the conversation is the part of the interaction with the police that happens before CJC gets involved, even in the slightest. So I'm thinking that organization, that group is certainly should be part of the conversation, but probably should not lead the conversation. That's it.
Thank you. Irene?
Thank you. I noticed that Tom Proctor made a comment in the chat a moment or two ago mentioning the Racial Justice Alliance. They are one of several organizations that come to my mind as to who might best help the select board handle this issue. And again, it's going to be a long-term process, but I can't imagine a better long-term process to be having right now, for example, compared to continuing to work on a merger draft. The Peace and Justice Center offers fabulous courses by people of color. I've taken them. I can't say enough good things about them. So if we want to raise awareness and we want to ensure that the select board goes into this being intentional, I would invite them in to help you in the future. Also, the select board has had tremendous good experiences with Jen Nauer from Jericho. She's a facilitator. She could also design a wonderful program to help the select board elicit whatever types of input the public needs to give you and that you should be hearing. I think we need to reimagine policing from the ground up. It will take a lot of time to do it right, but it should be job one. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to speak before we change topics? I'd like to thank everyone for their excellent suggestions, their words of warning, their preferences, and their critiques. They are all important. And I'd like to ask everyone their patience and understanding as we navigate this extremely difficult conversation in a very difficult atmosphere right now with all of those stuff that's going on. We are going to do our very, very best to include everyone's voice and do the best we can. So thank you for everyone for helping us move forward and to do better. Andrew, would you like to take it from there?
Just realized I'm trying to unmute myself. I turned my camera off. It looks like Patrick wanted to speak though.
Yeah, I did. Apologies. I should have mentioned this during the board portion, but it only occurred to me afterwards that I didn't ask it. If Jill is still on the call, what sort of turnaround or what sort of anticipation are you looking at for getting this conversation started? I think we've heard from the public that they want to see something moving fairly quickly. So I'd like to know if you have an anticipation of when you could start getting these groups together. Like, what's your timeline?
Hi, this is Jill. It struck me as we were talking that it could be possible to schedule an event and whoever felt comfortable showing up at it while we're also working at creating accessibility and safety for people who don't feel comfortable just showing up at a public comment period. And I mean, I think logistically getting in touch with the known stakeholders and entities in the Essex community who have been actively working in this area, like you and the Essex Western School District. I mean, I can commit to sending an email tomorrow to try to schedule the first convening of a stakeholder group within the next 2 weeks. I also acknowledge that it's July, but I know that there are people around to at least get it started.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Andy, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask for maybe some thoughts on if, you know, the memo listed a number of organizations that we would like to have at the table. Is there any concern that if we are specifically inviting organizations and recognizing them, would we also need to allow and recognize groups that we might not like to have at the table? And you know, what are thoughts around that? I don't know, Jill or staff or.
Well, I wouldn't see the table where comment happens being closed to anyone. I've seen in the chat that ACL Smart Justice has been mentioned.
the CJC works pretty closely with that organization as well as the NAACP. So there are also entities outside of the Essex community that might be partnered with to help us do this conversation well. I'm not sure underneath your question of entities who people might not feel comfortable coming to the table. I'm not aware of any.
Andy, are you responding or?
Well, I'm just trying to think if I've perhaps phrased the question incorrectly. I'm trying to, I guess, get a feel for whether there's any issue around, we've mentioned, Voices for Inclusion, Essex and Westford. We've been, the EHS Equity Planning Group. If we invite them to a conversation and we acknowledge them and we allow them to be stakeholders, are we apt to also draw in other stakeholders that might have a very different opinion who also want to have the opportunity to speak a viewpoint that that might be more in the wrong direction? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too.
I would think that an open conversation would be for a learning opportunity for everyone, and that we would not want to exclude people. Dawn, I saw your hand up, and then Evan, and then Greg.
Why don't you let Evan go first, because he's waving, so let him go.
Andy, I think in our conversations over the last couple of weeks with Aaron McGuire from View, Jill just today, and a little bit last week, and some others, our job here is to listen. We need to provide the format, the forum for people to talk to us and us to listen about their experiences and what they see are the issues, and then through groups and others come up with some suggestions of how to enact change. So I'm not necessarily worried that others would come and we won't like their opinion. I think they're going to have to express their opinions in the same way others are doing it, whether it's in person, anonymous, or other. I think it is for the record, Jill was just asked to do this. So if she is able to start putting people a word out to start this process, 2 weeks would be Herculean, especially what's going on. But I do want some opportunity to discuss with her some other options as well, because what I'm hearing from the public is maybe they still want their time to have the select board listen to them. And we can get into phases, but one of the conversations is this is not a one and done. You don't do an open forum, take 3 hours of comments and say thank you, and then that's it. I don't think that this is that type of topic, or it's not just about the police, it's not just about the manager's office, it's not about housing, it's about all of it. And so I think there's going to need to be a lot of times where we are reaching out to the public to give them that space, to give them that freedom, to give them that safety to tell us what their experiences are and what they're thinking. That's what I had.
Thanks, Evan. Dawn, did you want to go now?
Yes, I'll go. I'm still uncomfortable with the CJC doing this, and it sounds like the public is also. And I don't know if we missed it. Was it a consensus we were going to let them do it?
So, couple things. The manager does not need the board's approval to ask the CJC to do something, first of all. And second of all, and I made an executive decision here to ask Evan to ask the CJC to do this along with Andrew Brown, because that seemed to be the fastest way to get the conversation started. And we are not asking the CJC to lead this conversation. We are asking the CJC to convene it. So we're asking them to find a room, whether virtual or public, outdoors or whatever, and find methods for residents to come together and share their stories and make decisions together as to how they want to move forward. That does not mean the CJC would do that, lead that process. We just want them to get the right people in the room and get as many of them together and get as much feedback as possible from the public. And if that includes groups like the Racial Alliance and the Peace and Justice Center and Rights and Democracy and any other group that they feel is appropriate to bring to the table, fabulous. But my main concern was that we have something like 6 more meetings in the month of July. It's a vacation month, and we're booked with all sorts of business that also is timely. And while it may not be as important as racial justice is, it's stuff we have to do. And frankly, I think our board members are a little overwhelmed by the amount of work we're doing, but we can't not address this topic. So the CJC was the quickest and most reachable tool we had that I could think of to get started right away. And I don't expect it to, I have no idea what shape it's going to take. And I have no idea who else is going to come to the table besides the people who are listed in the memo. I hope it'll be a much broader audience, and I hope it'll be overwhelmingly people of color. But knowing that Essex is predominantly white, that's unlikely. So we're going to have to do the very best we can and consult as many different experts and as many different people with experiences that we don't have to help us do this properly. So that's why I thought we should start with the CJC.
Thank you.
Greg had his hand up, and then I see Pat, and then George, and then Evan.
I'm all set. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
I think George was actually ahead of me. I need a moment.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. When I first came onto the trustees a long time ago, we had need to make use of the CJC for an extensive police-related issue in the village. And I would urge any board member, if you haven't had experience with the CJC, please don't assume you know what they do. Please don't assume that they can handle this. They are trained facilitators. They are trained to have these kinds of community conversations in a way that, frankly, no offense to my other trustees and excellent colleagues on the select board, but their CJC is trained to have conversations that we are not trained in a way. And they are not beholden to the police. They interact with the police because that's one of the groups that they have to interact with. And I think if you just maybe want to go to their website and just take a peek at what the kinds of things that they do, and you'll get an understanding of why this is not kicking the can down the road at all. It's, in my view, transferring the task to a body that is just as impartial and just as capable, more capable really than what we are. And then we can always come into the conversation. So I wouldn't be quick to dismiss the CJC, please. Secondly, there was a comment made a while back about why are the trustees involved, and I can only say to you, we frequently, since we have half of the town's population lives within the village, and we own half the public property, and we have our own ordinances. A lot of times there are police-related issues and social issues that come to us, and they don't even get to the select board. They come to us first, and our interaction is directly with the board of trustees and the police. The select board might hear about it, or they might become involved at a later date. But that's why the trustees are involved in this conversation. I think they really do need to be. And I'll pass it over to someone else now. Thanks.
I think it's Pat's turn, and then Vince.
Muted.
I had it after like a second. Thank you, Evan. George, I want to just mention it. I don't think that anyone necessarily thinks that they're necessarily biased. I don't think that the CJC is biased or at all incapable of holding this conversation. But I do think that the time that we're in it means that any group where Jill Evans' boss is Captain Hogue, which he is, I mean, it means that we have to be very careful about how these conversations occur. There's an innate mistrust or distrust in some residents of color in Essex, and any organization that does operate under the umbrella of the police department, which the CJC does, no matter the excellent work that they do, and I, being aware of the organization, having lived in Essex with EWSD, seen their presentations, I agree they do amazing, excellent work with what they do. I just think that we need to be aware that the conversation is not whether or not they do good work. The conversation should be, is an organization that is under the purview of the police department an appropriate one to facilitate? I'm not entirely convinced that it is, but since the overall message here is that they are gathering stakeholders to let that conversation happen, that's why I'm okay with it. But I also kind of feel that as we've talked about this, and I apologize that we kind of are going around in circles a little bit, but we're gathering people to talk about the issues, the problems, the experiences that they've had in Essex. But do we know what this is going to look like? What are we going to do in response to it? What does the response look like? I'm wondering if this maybe needs to be a little bit more structured. I hear that we need to do a lot of listening, which I understand. But I also think that there needs to be some action taken too, and there are action items that maybe we should be looking at in the interim. Maybe what we do, for the absences in the police department that haven't been filled yet, the budgetary questions, things that other communities around us have already tackled. Burlington, as an example, I mean, they've already been through this process. They've had these conversations and they've made reductions. We're looking at 2 weeks out from now, maybe having a meeting to assemble some stakeholders, and we don't know what's going to come out of it at all. I mean, this is the longer I kind of listen to this, the more sort of formless and nebulous this is. I guess I would like to know if we're going to have an opportunity, before a month or 6 weeks or 2 months from now, to say, hey, these are some concrete steps that we've taken in the actions of racial justice or policing or what have you. I think those are valid questions that people are asking us that, even though I know this conversation is getting long, I think we need to address them.
Pat, if I could just make one quick comment. I hesitate to jump into the void and make all sorts of changes that we see other towns doing and that would make us feel like we're being proactive when we haven't heard from the people yet what they want us to do. So I appreciate the feeling of being unsettled and not having direction, but if we started, I'm not saying don't look at our budget, don't look at our policies, because we've started doing that. That's what the whole purpose of having the chief come talk last time. We need to hear what people are wanting so that we know what we're supposed to be doing. That's gonna, if you want to make some recommendations of things that we might think we should look at, great, but I want to hear what folks have to say. Vince?
Yeah, I just kind of want to echo what you said. I thought that was a good way to put it. My only I do want to address one of Pat's points about Burlington. Like their municipality is a much different municipality with different needs, and their police serve those needs differently. So I don't know that we can apples to apples look at just what other municipalities are doing around us. That said, I think we need to have sessions where the select board listens. And it doesn't mean that the CJC doesn't need to be involved. It doesn't mean that conversation doesn't need to get started and rolling, but the community needs to be able to vent to their elected officials and express how they feel. And I think that's just as much of an important part of like healing those wounds as concrete steps to change policies or change, change the structures in our municipality. So that's just my opinion.
Thanks, Vince. Raj, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to reiterate, I think my understanding is CJC is going to bring people around the table and get the conversation started, getting a process underway. That's my understanding. I'll second Irene's Peace and Justice Center. Excellent work they do for us at UVM with us. Very powerful group, very good work. I look forward to a very long, methodical, purposeful process. I wouldn't want to jump into anything too quickly, but I will say if the CJC needs anything, there are a lot of board members here very interested in helping in any way, shape, or form. I agree with so much of what's been said here. The last 2 joint meetings we've had, these issues have come up. So we know we have a lot of work to do. We need to do it all the time and not just for a couple months after things blow up. So again, I look forward to the CJC starting a process and not doing all the work. And if there's anything that any of us can do, please let us know. Resources, help, time, all of that. So thanks.
Thanks, Raj. Okay, let's move on to the next business item. We are absolutely not done with this, but it's time to move on for the time being.
So we're not making any decision here? I'm not sure what we're doing.
It's not a vote by either board.
So this is something you've decided and we're going to go do?
This was a request that the chair of the select board and the president of the trustees made of the town manager to get this process started. I realize what you're asking, Andy, and what you're saying is that you feel that I have moved without the permission of the board to do something that you feel we should vote on. But I think asking Evan to ask the CJC to get this process started is not something that requires a vote.
I think it should have come. I think it should come as a proposal and a discussion and a decision rather than we're being told what's being done. Your vote is no bigger than my vote.
If you would like to have a vote, then by all means, let's do one right now. Please make a motion.
Okay.
We
I
have
move
very
that
long
the,
discussion. It's been an hour.
I move that the select board schedule a meeting to collect public input on this topic.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Any further discussion?
Was that a second by whom? Please?
Dawn.
Thank
Dawn
you
was
very
the
much.
second.
Thank you.
No further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Great. So now we'll have something done by the CJC and something done by the select board. I'd love to hear from you whether you'd have the time to be able to facilitate that, Andy, because I sure don't, and I don't have the expertise to do it right either. So perhaps we can talk about that offline, how we'll accomplish this in such a way that the community is well served.
Well, we could have had that discussion this evening. That could have been the discussion tonight instead of what we went through was a lot of important stuff. Yes.
Yes.
But it's not a process that you go through in a representative government. I'm really upset about this.
I'm sorry to have upset you, and I'm sorry to have moved forward in a way that you feel uncomfortable with. I would be happy to have a conversation with you and the board at a select board meeting and not a joint meeting on how the select board should move forward on this thing that we just approved to do. Would that be okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so Greg, could you please put on the next select board agenda that the first item of business will be how the select board is going to facilitate a community conversation on policing in Essex. Is that the appropriate topic, Andy, or should it be more broad than that?
Is the first thing we should do is listen to the public, right?
Okay.
And then plan, right? So I think the way the meeting should go is we've heard that that folks want to tell us, explain their issues to us or bring up their issues or have discussion about this. We're going to sit and we're going to listen. And
Would
then
you
we can, I
prefer
think
it
we
was
can
kind
have
of
the
like a
conversation.
hear? Would you prefer it's like kind of like a hearing like we did with the firearms? Like an open mic kind of a
no.
thing?
I think we need to be mostly completely in listening mode, not responding, responding very little to what people say, other than to say, thank you for your comments and I appreciate it. And we'll take that under consideration, and, or maybe you want to have ask for clarifying comments. I don't think us having another discussion about how to facilitate this is the right way to go. I think the next thing we need to do is have an open discussion, open listening session, or whatever you want to call it.
So then are you suggesting that our next select board meeting be simply a public input session without anything else on the agenda?
I don't know.
You're asking us to decide that right now, so I do need to know, because I've obviously overstepped and made you uncomfortable, so I want to make sure that the next step we take is.
What can staff support?
I don't know.
I'm asking staff whether they can support, whether we can have a whole meeting doing that, or whether we, work till 11 or 12 at night to get whatever business done we need to get done in the next meeting. I don't know. I'm just a member, okay? I'm not even one of your elected, I'm not even your vice chair or anything. I'm just me, so.
Andy, your opinion matters. And when you disagree, it's usually for a good reason. So we're trying to accommodate you. Evan, what is your estimation of how this might work? I see your hand up.
So if you don't mind, I saw Jill. I wanted to hear what she had to say, and then I could give you my opinion. So Jill, if you're ready, you're muted. Still.
Hi, sorry, this
there
is
you
Jill.
go.
I just wanted, there were a couple people in the meeting chat who had said they wanted to speak, and it looks like they feel like they weren't heard or seen. So I just wanted to point that out in case you wanted to go back to that. And I guess just while I'm on the phone, I wonder, is it possible for the select board to start 45 minutes or an hour earlier in order to take public comment before your meeting, specifically around this issue?
That's definitely one possibility.
So thank you, Jill, because that was in line where I was going. While I was listening, I jotted down some dates. I think the public at large wants the select board to hear them. Maybe not so much answer them or do something immediately. They want to be heard. And so I could throw out some dates that you have a night. And if it's 3 hours, it's 3 hours. If it's 4 hours, it's 4 hours. If it's 5, it's 5. But you make yourself available with no other business and listen. And then as we're putting that together, we are also putting together the next phases with these groups that is going to take time. As you all know, there's 5 of you, 10 with this village board. Every time you add one more person, you add complexity to a schedule of how to get them all in the same electronic room as we are in now. So I would suggest we have some option dates. We send them out tomorrow. We find out people's availability. We put out a warning to a meeting that says it's a listening session. Have people speak their mind, and then let them know that the second phase or future phases is going to be more listening and interaction. That's what I'm hearing. And I'm happy to work with the CJC and VIEW and the Peace and Justice Center, Racial Justice Alliance, and anybody who can help me and the staff and the select board facilitate a meaningful discussion amongst them where we're listening and we're taking it all in. I want to do less talking and more listening.
And thank you. Jill, you still have your hand up. Did you have more?
I'm sorry, no, I don't. I'll take it down.
Vince, your hand is up.
Yeah, I mean, this really isn't about policing, but I just wanted to say that I felt like, you made a decision, an executive decision. Andy questioned that decision, and then you proceeded to attack Andy. And I know emotions are running high, but I feel like the way you were asking questions, the tone that you had, you were bullying Andy in a public meeting. And that's my opinion, but that's what I see right here in front of me. I mean, we didn't have to figure out the details of that meeting like right then and there. We didn't have to know exactly what we were going to do. I mean, I agree this is a place to do it, but just the sharpness of how you were asking that, and it just didn't sit well with me.
Vince, I appreciate your criticisms and I apologize for my strident approach. I didn't mean to put anybody on the spot. I'm glad the result has been that we will have another public meeting, and I appreciate the staff's flexibility as we try to make this happen. There's a number of comments in the chat, so with everyone's permission, I would like to reopen because there are some very unhappy people who have something to say. Is there a general consensus that that's okay with everyone?
Yes.
So I'm going to flip back into the chat and I'm going to go in order. I see comments from Lorraine, Irene, Tracy, and Tanya. If you four are still asking questions, please feel free to go ahead.
Hi, it's Lorraine. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I'd like to respond back to George and the kicking the can down the road. Jill herself said that there is an apparent conflict of interest. I believe that the CJC's budget is paid for out of the police budget. Am I correct in that?
You are correct.
Okay.
No,
So
I'll answer.
Sorry, no, you're.
If you don't mind, the CJC is a grant from the State Department of Corrections. It just happens to go through the police department because that's where it fit whenever it got started. So
correct, but it's still through their budget, correct?
That is correct.
All right, so that's my point.
Okay.
Secondly, in terms of George saying that about the police ordinances and people speaking to them, my understanding about the select board is that you represent the whole town, including the junction. So to see the trustees weigh in, they're welcome to weigh in like we do, as citizens. I'm not sure, again, while they're at this meeting, I understood the first time, it kind of made sense because of the ordinance, but since we're not talking about directly with police today, I don't understand it. And then thirdly, not to put our new chief off, but just to see Chief Hoag's name in the chat, I'm sure is intimidating to a number of people in terms of speaking here today even. So just a point, I don't know how that would be dealt with, but that's intimidating in of itself. Thank you for your time. Oh, and two, Elaine, I don't appreciate you talking to Andy that way, just really uncalled for. And I do appreciate your work. I'm not saying I don't appreciate your work. I don't appreciate seeing someone bullied in a meeting. So thank you very much for your time.
You're muted, Elaine.
Thank you, Lorraine. I believe Irene is next.
Thank you. I want to say, first of all, that I appreciate all the work that the CJC does. They are not anyone's personal party planner. We need to hire a facilitator who's not connected to the police. If you didn't hear me say that earlier, it has to be someone else. A different organization outside of Essex, a different facilitator from outside of Essex. Secondly, I'm offended by the fact that the village trustees on this call are, number one, taking part in this agenda item for all the reasons that have been stated beforehand. I don't appreciate that they're pressuring select board members on behalf of a former village trustee's idea that she is pushing autocratically on the rest of the board, and I hope it never happens again. And finally, the select board's job, and we've gone over this and over this and over this for the past 13 years that I've been intimately watching the select board. The select board chair is a traffic cop and nothing else. The select board chair has no business formulating policy behind the scenes or even in front of the rest of the members without their knowing it. It is completely unacceptable for anybody except the town manager to be writing memos with certain ideas, and they are for discussion, not imposing the will of one board member on another, no matter how good the idea, no matter how long-standing a member that person is, and no matter what their elected position on the board. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Tracy is next.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment that we have people in our community who feel disrespected, who feel disenfranchised, who do not feel safe in the community in which they live. And for that sole reason, it makes me extremely uncomfortable to keep hearing people say that we don't have time, we don't have time. This needs to be number one priority. People feel unsafe. People are living in fear. That needs to be number one priority. Also, I just want to make the point that this needs to be a multi-pronged approach. I always go back to the platinum rule. It's not the golden rule of treat others how you want to be treated. It's treat others how they need to be treated. Listen to people in a way, allow them to speak in a way that's most meaningful to them and that they feel comfortable with. Again, it's a question of making this a true priority to truly listen and understand others' experiences.
Thank you, Tracy. I think our last commenter is Tanya, and then we'll go back to the board. Some board members have their hands up.
First off, I'd like to thank you, Andy, for standing up to make sure that we're heard and that this goes through the democratic process. Secondly, I would like to echo a lot of what has been said. People in our community feel unsafe, and this has to be our first priority. I understand that everyone is busy. I'm busy too, and we cannot continue to have people who feel unsafe asking for help, people who are not part of our public safety system, because the system is structured from its foundation against them. And I know that the CJC does amazing work. I do know that. However, they are mired in the structure of our presently broken criminal justice system, and thus are not the right ones to lead this conversation. And it's not because I don't think they do amazing work. It's that I think we need to restructure a public safety system from the ground up that is inclusive of everyone. There are lots of skilled facilitators out there that can be hired to come in and help support this conversation. And there are many organizations led by people of color who can help facilitate this conversation. And those are the people that we need to be centering in these conversations. You're absolutely right. Essex is a very white community, which is all the more reason we need to fight to lift up every voice of color to be heard first, because they are the people in our community that feel unsafe. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. I think it's Andrew and then Raj.
Raj had his hand up first. If he's okay with me going first, I'll go. If he wants to go first, leave it up to him.
Right, you go ahead. President.
Has a bit of a different connotation this day. So what I was going to say is, as a board who makes ordinances, the ordinances that we create in the village, which are not the exact same as the ordinances that are in the town outside of the village, or as the select board has, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we understand what the police department is doing. It is incumbent upon us to make sure that the ordinances that we have created are not, do not have any implicit bias. It is incumbent upon us to hear from the community to make sure that the things that we have done through our ordinances are not unfairly targeting one group of our community any differently than another. As such, I would request if the select board would be so willing to include the trustees on that, as well as for the communities in that conversation that was just motioned, as well as for the community's understanding that we are a part of the police department's authority. We give them authority to do certain things within the village. And so for us to not be a part of hearing this type of debate or this type of feedback that we have yet to receive, I feel would be a significant disservice to the community.
Andrew, thank you. Raj?
Well, following up on what Andrew just said, I guess for the village trustees, I'd make a motion that we join the select board in convening an opportunity for public comment, and to do that in joint meeting so that we can hear what the public has to say and go from there. So I'll make a motion to join the select board in convening a public meeting to hear
Raj.
comments to the public on.
Raj, with respect, if I can interrupt for a moment, the select board has asked to have a gathering with the select board. And so I believe it would be appropriate to make sure it is okay with the select board that the trustees join us in a joint meeting for this topic.
Good point.
So do you mind holding your motion?
Absolutely.
Were there other comments you wanted to make before I asked the board that question?
No disrespect in being assumptive, sorry.
Okay. So select board, you've heard a request from the trustees. They would like to join us, I'm assuming at a joint meeting as an official capacity for the public conversation that we just voted on having. What are your thoughts on that question? Pat?
I completely agree that they should be involved. I brought this up, I believe, a few weeks ago, if not last week, and I'll bring it up again with specific examples if I need to, that the trustees are well within their rights to implement ordinances that impact the police department, like banning chokeholds, for example. They may, enact ordinances that prevent or restrict the police department in what they can do within the boundaries of the village of Essex Junction. To not include them in these conversations is to do a great disservice to the entirety of our community. So yes, I would absolutely invite them to be part of that listening discussion.
Any other board members? Andy?
I don't want it to delay the schedule. I mean, Evan mentioned the difficulty of getting just 5 people together, but to get 10 together is going to be painful. I don't want to, anybody can come to the meeting, yes, if you're available, right? But I don't want it to impact the schedule. The other thing is my understanding, I have, been on this board for a little while, that there's an agreement that authorizes that between the town and the village, or the police department and the village, that explains the terms of the policing arrangement. And I've looked through all my files and I can't find a copy of it, but I know it has renewed at least once since I've been on the board. It's a self-renewing document that if no action is taken, it renews itself. But I have no recollection of what the terms are in that, and I don't know if the town staff has time to go find that document and explain to us what the terms are. But I'm not assuming that the trustees have any influence over police department policy, which is what we're talking about. What needs to be enacted is policy. Doesn't necessarily, that the fact that the village can enact ordinances doesn't imply to me that they can set police department policy. So I'm not in favor of arranging the scheduled meeting around the trustees, and I would say they can attend as members of the public.
Vince or Dawn?
Yeah, I think Andy makes a good point. It's probably going to be this is probably going to be a series of discussions in my kind of future casting, looking at what's going on. So if we can get the ball rolling with the select board first, and then maybe, schedule it around the select board, if the trustees can make it, great. If not, future conversations, we have a better chance to schedule all parties involved. If the trustees want to hold another meeting for themselves to listen, then we can come together in another meeting and try to work on like the commonalities we hear, maybe some differences, and then hear from the public some more with both boards.
Thanks, Vince. Dawn, I see you nodding.
I concur with both Andy and Vince.
So a consensus of the select board seems that the majority does not wish our partners on the trustees to join this particular meeting as an official joint meeting in their official capacity. Is that accurate? I have to say I am incredibly disappointed, but I understand the logic. Even though the select board is in charge of policy for the police, if the village opts to have an ordinance that prevents the police from using chokeholds, but the town doesn't, and there's some kind of incident where someone is harmed, how is that going to work out? I mean, I'm not going to go into hypotheticals and stuff, but
yeah, that is a hypothetical. There's no way we would allow chokeholds.
I'm just trying to say, I shouldn't have gone down the hypothetical road. What I'm trying to say is, all along, above all else, we have been trying for years to model togetherness, to model that we are one community, to model that we are all neighbors, and to officially reject a request by the trustees to simply sit at the table with us to hear the conversations from our residents, who are town residents as well as village residents. Not to let them come join us, I think, is a slap in the face, and I'm deeply disappointed.
Can I, Elaine, join in here for a second? I'd like to echo the disappointment, and I guess, hearing a select board member say, if the trustees want to have people come back and speak to them as well later, that's fine. Like the folks we want to hear from have all kinds of time in the world to tell their stories. Now that would be 3 times, if I'm not incorrect. You want the CJC to hear from them. You want the select board to hear from them, which it should have been where it happened in the first place. Mm-hmm. And now you're saying, well, if they want the board that actually represents them as well to hear from them, they should make them tell their story now a 3rd time. I'll leave it. Thanks. Let's get on to the merger, because that's going to be a good night to talk about that too.
Any other board members? All right. Let's move on to item 5B. Review, discuss, and edit draft merger charter. Andrew?
Elaine, if the boards are okay, personally, I need a few minutes. I'm not.
Me too. Thank you.
I'm not ready. So if the trustees are okay, I'm going to suggest we take about a 5 or 10 minute break, and we can reconvene in, let's say, my clock says 9:02, so let's say 9:12. Let's give us 10 minutes to take a break, and we'll be back. George, I think you're talking, but you're on mute.
I think it's a great idea. I think some of us are feeling very much slapped across the face. Thanks, Ian.
Agreed, George. Thank you.
fine.
George, before we get back into the meeting, I see your hands up. Was there something you wanted to mention
Nope,
starting
nope.
off?
No,
Okay.
I'll lower my hand, sorry.
Okay. We got to see that we got 1 more minute before I'll call back to order. So my clock says 9:12. Before I call the trustees to order, I just want to make sure that everyone is back. I see George. Amber, are you on?
Yep, I'm here.
Raj, are you back?
I am back. Sorry, having trouble with, a mouse.
No worries, that happens. So we have the trustees back. I will go ahead and call us back into session. Elaine, you're on mute.
I will call the select board back into session.
Thank you, Elaine. So we were going to jump into item 5B. Personally, seeing as how a majority of the select board did not feel that we should be at the table to hear a conversation for the trustees, I will go ahead and just make a motion that we adjourn tonight.
I will second that motion, Andrew. Thank you.
So trustees, we have a motion on the table to adjourn. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Anybody opposed? All right. Elaine, Patrick, thank you. Select board, good night.
Motion to adjourn. There's no point in continuing this. It's become too contentious. We should adjourn. We all just need to take a breath, be calm, and revisit this when we can think with clear heads.
Is there a board member that would like to second that? There are no other business items for the select board to conduct on this agenda because this was a joint meeting, so we can't really continue without this.
Second.
Vince has motioned and Pat has seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
The vote is 4-1 in favor of adjournment. And I think it's because we don't have any other business to conduct on our own. The agenda is scheduled to conduct the rest of the business with the trustees, and they are no longer here, so we can't do that business. So therefore, we're adjourned.